Greetings, remnant and online friends. Welcome to the Midweek Refuel, where we seek out the ancient wisdom, simply because modern wisdom is so terribly sure of itself. So terribly sure of itself that it has actually edited the work we are reading from today. That's right, you heard correctly. The man who actually warned us against these very things, Chesterton, the very person that warned us that this was going to happen, has been edited to conform to modern sensibilities and modern ignorance. They literally dumbed this book down, softened its rough edges, and sanitized the language for modern, way oversensitive ears. Think about that for a second, will you? Just let that set on your soul. You now must search out and find for yourselves the unedited version of truth. Because the default one, the default truth, it's been trimmed, it's been tamed and neutered by editors who, ironically, have become living proof of Chesterton's diagnosis. The modern mind has become so rational that it can't handle reason, so inclusive that it excludes the past. Think about it. So tolerant that it now censors books that dare to challenge it. And so we begin this lesson with a very simple confession. We want the whole thing, not the focus group approved version, not the safe for streaming version, not the emotionally soft, doctrinally vague, socially inoffensive version. We came here for wisdom, ancient wisdom. And if that wisdom offends modern insanity, so be it. Let them be offended. Today's lesson is titled Hanwell Culture, the Madness of Modern Sanity. And by the time we finish reading, I hope you'll see why that title isn't just clever, it's diagnostic. As I was researching and studying this book for today's very lesson, I ran into trouble getting a copy of the actual book online. I have here in my possession what I believe, and that is crucial, for I truly have no way of knowing, and that should scare all of us to death, to be the original 1908 American publication of Chesterton's Orthodoxy. But after looking around, I'm not so sure. My copy is also very different from many of the modern reprintings, the abridged ebooks, and even some of the so-called study editions floating around online. In fact, and this should truly disturb us, some of these versions don't just differ in formatting or typesetting. They remove entire paragraphs, rewrite Chesterton's vocabulary, sanitize his tone, and quietly erase his cultural references because today's reader might not get it. Hanwell removed. Joanna Southcote omitted. As plain as a pikestaff, swiped for as obvious as a street sign. So I ask again, what are we reading? If the words on the page have already been massaged, modernized, or mangled, then how much truth can survive that kind of treatment? We're in danger, folks. And what does it say about our culture that we feel the need to edit prophets after they're dead? Chesterton was warning us about the insanity of modernity, and modernity proved his point by editing the warning itself. This is what happens in Hanwell culture, where madness wears a lab coat, where sensitivity overrides truth, and where a book must be dumbed down so no one gets hurt by an idea. We have raised generations of perpetual children. They reason like children. They demand that the world accommodate their feelings instead of training their feelings to face the world like an adult. Just as Paul warned us, quote, they will not endure sound teaching, but will turn aside to myths. That's 2 Timothy 4:3-4. They want safety. They don't want truth. They want affirmation. They definitely don't want correction. They see that as violence. Emotion, not conviction. And like Paul asked the Galatians, quote, have I become your enemy by telling you the truth? unquote. That's Galatians 4:16 if you want to look it up. And now the proof of that immaturity is found in how we handle books. Books are no longer places of confrontation, exploration, or transformation. No, they are curated comfort zones, carefully trimmed to avoid offending the most fragile. We've gone from in the beginning was the word to in the beginning was the trigger warning. Chesterton didn't write for children. He wrote for souls. He wrote for people who could be wounded, convicted, even offended, and then still show up next week to wrestle with the truth. But Hanwell culture doesn't want truth. It wants managed impressions. It wants to lobotomize the mind before the soul ever has a chance to wake up. And that's why we're here today. Not to read a book safely, but to read it faithfully, God willing. So if you've come looking for comfort, I was going to say you might be in the wrong place. You are in the wrong place. But if you've come looking for clarity, welcome to The Maniac. This was one of the first books I ever read after my sanctification. It captured my attention in a way only C.S. Lewis had done previously. I had read enough ancient wisdom by this time in my life to understand that I needed help desperately. I needed the annotated version. I needed that version to help me out, to guide me, to tell me that Hanwell was not just a place, it was a punchline with teeth. It was an infamous insane asylum just outside of London, so well known that to say someone had Hanwell written on his face was the Edwardian equivalent of saying that man belongs in Bedlam. And I bet some of you don't even know what that statement means. It was cultural shorthand for the institutionalized collapse of reason, and Chesterton, with his usual fire, used it to describe not the spiritually chaotic, but the hyper-rational, the system addicted, the overconfident logician, the man who believed too much in himself. That Joanna Southcote was a woman in the 18th century who claimed to be pregnant with the Messiah at 64 years old. She had over 100,000 followers, sincere and devout. Chesterton invokes her, not as a joke, but as a warning. Sincerity is not truth. Believing in yourself loudly and confidently without correction doesn't make you a prophet. It makes you a case study. That a pike staff was a long wooden pole used by soldiers or guards, often with a symbol or blade affixed to the top of it, and it became an image of something you shall not pass, something impossible to miss, as plain as a pike staff meant blindingly obvious, so obvious that only someone willfully blind could pretend not to see it. Like, say, the existence of sin, or the fact that reason needs boundaries to exist. Things like that. William Cowper, we'll read about him, was a poet who wrote deeply about faith, deeply about grace, and deeply about suffering, and who battled severe mental illness most of his life. He was crushed by the despair of Calvinist predestination, believing himself damned, and yet somehow he wrote comedy. And that John Gilpin, the runaway hero of Cowper's most famous comic ballad, was the accidental deliverance. The man who couldn't stop a horse became the man who gave Cowper back his sanity. So, Chesterton writes, he was damned by John Calvin. He was almost saved by John Gilpin. Because sometimes laughter and joy is the only medicine left standing when logic has failed and theology has turned cold. And now, thanks to the madness of modern sanity, you need a translator just to read a simple book. Not because they were unclear, but because we've grown too dull to hear them any longer. We have to unearth the original voices from under layers of modern censorship, editorial tidying, and digital oversimplification because someone decided that readers shouldn't have to stretch. Chesterton didn't write for toddlers. He wrote for grown-ups, and he meant to make you one. It used to be that when you went to books for knowledge, it used to be you sat there with a dictionary by your side and a shelf of encyclopedias within arm's reach, and you did the hard work of learning. You didn't expect the author to accommodate your ignorance. You honored the author by rising up to meet him. Not anymore. Now we expect the book to bend, the prophet must be paraphrased, the theologian must be made tweetable, and the hard truth must be made soft enough for the modern soul to chew with milk teeth. What used to be a staircase to wisdom has been flattened into a wheelchair ramp for the intellectually atrophied. And instead of handing out dictionaries, we hand out disclaimers. Instead of wrestling with meaning, we add margin notes that say, "Don't worry, this doesn't mean what you think it means." Well, it does mean what you think it means. But here's the real tragedy. When you dumb down the word, you also dumb down the blade. And Chesterton's sword was never meant to be safe. It was meant to cut through the fog, to pierce the madness, and to leave you exposed and undone so you could finally be made whole. Do you know what is intentionally being done to you? Do you have any clue? If not, then as the scripture says, wake up, O sleeper. They are intentionally preparing you for compliance into the system. Not wisdom, not discernment, not holiness, compliance. They are shaping you not to think, but to repeat, not to reason, but to submit. See to it, Paul says, that no one takes you captive by empty deceit. That's Colossians 2:8. Not to search out truth like buried treasure, but to nod along as it's handed to you, already filtered, already footnoted, already fixed. This isn't about helping you understand. It never was. It's about making sure you never ask the wrong questions. It's about training you to distrust complexity, to distrust nuance, to distrust mystery and paradox. All the things that made Christianity dangerously alive. And so the editors edit. The publishers, they soften. The platforms, they suppress. And we, if we're not careful, we become docile sheep led by wolves wearing the fleece of clarity. Chesterton wrote for the soul. Then they want you tamed by sentiment. But there is no salvation without disruption, and there is no discipleship without discomfort. So I ask you again, what are they doing to you? They are dulling the blade. And unless we recover the edge, we will bleed out by paper cuts and never know why. Once upon a time, people read books seeking truth. Today, we go online seeking consensus. We used to approach a book like a mountain to climb, something higher than us. We assumed the author knew something that we didn't, and we came with a dictionary in one hand and a pencil in the other. We were there to learn, to be shaped, to be disciplined by the truth. But now we enter the digital feed, not to be taught, but to be affirmed. We no longer ask, is this true? We ask, do other people agree with me? We're not hunting for wisdom. We're hurting towards safety, and there's no safety there. This is not intellectual progress, friends. It's engineered regression. Engineered regression. You are being intentionally turned into cattle. They don't want you wise. They want you herdable, manageable, not educated, processed, not transformed, templated, not thoughtful, compliant. What happened to a generation trained this way? Well, they become emotionally fragile and intellectually dull. Sound familiar? They can't hold tension. They panic when confronted. They mistake discomfort for danger, and they treat disagreement as though it was this hate speech thing they made up a long time ago. They're not growing into discerners. No, they're shrinking into dependence to the very ones doing this to them. They don't read to understand. They scroll to agree. They don't follow reason. They follow retweets. They don't value clarity. They fear it because clarity divides, and division to them feels like a horrible violence. They've been trained to believe that strong ideas are a threat and that strong words are abuse. And so we dumb down the prophets and soften the saints and sand off the edges of every sharp book that might pierce that fog. They've turned the sword into a spoon. You're not being empowered. You are being infantilized, softened, sorted, and spiritually sedated. You think you are enlightened, but heaven says, quote, you do not realize you are wretched, blind, and naked, unquote, Revelations 3:17. The goal isn't knowledge anymore. The goal is compliance to the system. And the tragedy is that most people won't even resist because they've been taught to call stupidity humility and to call obedience kindness. Here's the thing about deception. It's easy to convince someone that other people have been fooled. It's nearly impossible to convince someone that they have been fooled. Why? Pride and ego. Because the ego doesn't want to repent. It wants to protect itself. And the system knows that and uses that. You were told you were informed, but you were fed headlines and told they were history. You were told you were open-minded, but you were trained to flinch at hard truths and retreat into consensus. You've been programmed to trust the crowd and mock anyone who tries to warn you, so mock away. They don't need to silence you, my friend. They've convinced you to silence yourself. If this stings, good. Because you can't wake up gently when the house is on fire. Cry aloud, do not hold back. Lift up your voice like a trumpet. Isaiah 58:1. You've been lied to, and worse, you were trained to enjoy it. If this is hitting something inside of you, if your spirit is stirring within you, if you feel the fog beginning to burn away, don't let that moment pass. Today might be your day. Do me a favor and hit the like and subscribe button. Share this with someone who's been sleepwalking through a world that's been lying to them, because today we're not just ranting, we're reading. We hope we are reading the actual words of G.K. Chesterton, unedited, unabridged, unsoftened. We've tracked down what appears to be the original 1908 American printing of Orthodoxy, a little different than the British one. So there already starts the dominoes. But the truth is, even that I'm uncertain of. And that uncertainty, that should disturb us all. But here's what we do know. What you are about to read with me is a sword, not a spoon. So lean in, let it cut you. Let it clear the madness away. The word of God is sharper than any sword, piercing soul and spirit. Let's read. Thoroughly worldly people never understand even the world. They rely altogether on a few cynical maxims, which are not true. Once I remember walking with a prosperous publisher who made a remark which I had often heard before. It is indeed almost a motto of the modern world, yet I heard it once too often and saw suddenly that there was nothing in it. The publisher said of somebody, "That man will get on. He believes in himself." And I remember that as I lifted my head to listen, my eye caught an omnibus on which was written Hanwell. I said to him, "Shall I tell you where the men are who believe most in themselves? For I can tell you. I know of men who believe in themselves more colossally than Napoleon or Caesar. I know where flames the fixed star of certainty and success. I can guide you to the thrones of the supermen. The men who really believe in themselves are all in lunatic asylums." He said mildly that there were a good many men, after all, who believed in themselves and who were not in lunatic asylums. "Yes, there are," I retorted. "And you of all men ought to know them. That drunken poet from whom you would not take a dreary tragedy, he believed in himself. That elderly minister with an epic from whom you were hiding in a back room, yeah, he believed in himself. If you consulted your business experience instead of your ugly individualistic philosophy, you would know that believing in himself is one of the commonest signs of a rotter. Actors who can't act believe in themselves, and debtors who won't pay. It would be much truer to say that a man will certainly fail because he believes in himself. Complete self-confidence is not merely a sin. Complete self-confidence is a weakness. Believing utterly in oneself is a hysterical and superstitious belief, like believing in Joanna Southcote. The man who has it has Hanwell written on his face as plain as it is written on that omnibus. And to all this, my friend the publisher made this very deep and effective reply. Well, if a man is not to believe in himself, in what is he to believe? After a long pause, I replied, I will go home and write a book in answer to that question. This is the book that I have written in answer to it. But I think this book may well start where our argument started, in the neighborhood of the madhouse. Modern masters of science are much impressed with the need of beginning all inquiry with a fact. The ancient masters of religion were quite equally impressed with that necessity. They began with the fact of sin. A fact as practical as potatoes. Whether or no man could be washed in miraculous waters, there was no doubt, at any rate, that he did indeed want washing. But certain religious leaders in London, not mere materialists, have begun in our day not to deny the highly disputable water, but to deny the indisputable dirt. Certain new theologians dispute original sin, which is the only part of Christian theology which can really be proved. Some followers of the Reverend R.J. Campbell, in their almost too fastidious spirituality, admit divine sinlessness, which they cannot see even in their dreams. But they essentially deny human sin, which they can see in the street. The strongest saints and the strongest skeptics alike took positive evil as the starting point of their argument. If it be true, as it certainly is, that a man can feel exquisite happiness in skinning a cat, then the religious philosopher can only draw one of two deductions. He must either deny the existence of God, as all atheists do, or he must deny the present union between God and man, as all Christians do. The new theologian seems to think it a highly rationalistic solution to deny the cat. In this remarkable situation, it is plainly not now possible, with any hope of a universal appeal, to start, as our fathers did, with the fact of sin. This very fact, which was to them and is to me as plain as a pikestaff, is the very fact that has been specially diluted or denied. But though moderns deny the existence of sin, I do not think that they have yet denied the existence of a lunatic asylum. We all agree still that there is a collapse of the intellect as unmistakable as a falling house. Men deny hell, but not as yet Hanwell. For the purpose of our primary argument, the one may very well stand where the other stood. I mean that as all thoughts and theories were once judged by whether they tended to make a man lose his soul, so for our present purpose, all modern thoughts and theories must be judged by whether they tend to make a man lose his wits. It is true that some speak lightly and loosely of insanity, as if itself attractive. But a moment's thought will show that if disease is beautiful, it is generally someone else's disease. A blind man may be picturesque, but it requires two eyes to see that picture. And similarly, even the wildest poetry of insanity can only be enjoyed by the sane. To the insane man, his insanity is quite prosaic because it is quite true. A man who thinks himself a chicken is to himself as ordinary as a chicken. A man who thinks he is a bit of glass is to himself as dull as a bit of glass. It is the homogeneity of his mind which makes him dull and which makes him mad. It is only because we see the irony of his idea that we think him even amusing. It is only because he does not see the irony of his idea that he is put in Hanwell at all. In short, oddities only strike ordinary people. Oddities do not strike odd people. This is why ordinary people have a much more exciting time, while odd people are always complaining of the dullness of life. This is also why the new novels die so quickly and why the old fairy tales endure forever. The old fairy tale makes the hero a normal human boy. It is his adventures that are startling. They startle him because he is normal. But in the modern psychological novel, the hero is abnormal. The center is not central. Hence, the fiercest adventures fail to affect him adequately. And the book is monotonous. You can make a story out of a hero among dragons, but not out of a dragon among dragons. The fairy tale discusses what a sane man will do in a mad world. The sober, realistic novel of today discusses what an essential lunatic will do in a dull world. Let us begin then with the madhouse. From this evil and fantastic inn, let us set forth on our intellectual journey. Now, if we are to glance at the philosophy of sanity, the first thing to do in the matter is to blot out one big and common mistake. There is a notion adrift everywhere that imagination, especially mystical imagination, is dangerous to man's mental balance. Poets are commonly spoken of as psychologically unreliable, and generally there is a vague association between wreathing laurels in your hair and sticking straws in it. Facts and history utterly contradict this view. Most of the very great poets have been not only sane, but extremely businesslike. And if Shakespeare ever really held horses, it was because he was much the safest man to hold them. Imagination does not breed insanity. Exactly what does breed insanity is reason. Poets do not go mad, but chess players do. Mathematicians go mad and cashiers, but creative artists very seldom. I am not, as will be seen, in any sense attacking logic. I only say that this danger does lie in logic, not in imagination. Artistic paternity is as wholesome as physical paternity. Moreover, it is worthy of remark that when a poet really was morbid, it was commonly because he had some weak spot of rationality on his brain. Poe, for instance, really was morbid, not because he was poetical, but because he was skeptically analytical. Even chess was too poetical for him. He disliked chess because it was full of knights and castles, like a poem. He avowedly preferred the black discs of drought because they were more like the mere black dots on a diagram. Perhaps the strongest case of all is this, that only one great English poet went mad, Cowper. And he was definitely driven mad by logic, by the ugly and alien logic of predestination. Poetry was not the disease, but the medicine. Poetry partly kept him in health. He could sometimes forget the red and thirsty hell to which his hideous necessitarianism dragged him among the wide waters and the white flat lilies of the Ouse. He was damned by John Calvin. He was almost saved by John Gilpin. Everywhere we see that men do not go mad by dreaming, critics are much madder than poets. Homer is complete and calm enough. It is his critics who tear him into extravagant tatters. Shakespeare is quite himself. It is only some of his critics who have discovered that he was somebody else. And though St. John the Evangelist saw many strange monsters in his vision, he saw no creature so wild as one of his own commentators. The general fact is simple. Poetry is sane because it floats easily in an infinite sea. Reason seeks to cross the infinite sea and so make it finite. The result is mental exhaustion, like the physical exhaustion of Mr. Holbein. To accept everything is an exercise. To understand everything, a strain. The poet only desires exaltation and expansion, a world to stretch himself in. The poet only asks to get his head into the heavens. It is the logician who seeks to get the heavens into his head, and it is his head that splits. They want your mind quiet. They want your faith vague, and they want your allegiance flexible. But Christ didn't come to negotiate with the system. He came to overthrow the system, not with politics, not with popularity, but with a cross And praise God, an empty tomb. Chesterton saw it before it was popular, the fog, the madness, the dulling of everything sacred. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, Romans 1:22. But now you've seen it too, I hope. Sanctify them in truth. Your word is truth, John 17:17. The entrance of your words gives light. It gives understanding to the simple, Psalm 119, 130. Faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ, Romans 10:17. So don't go back to sleep. Don't give your soul to the machine. Bow to no algorithm, surrender to no trend, and fear no crowd. There is only one truth, one name, one king. Christ is king. Hail to the king.